It's bigger, it's badder, but is it better?
Home Alone 2: Lost in New York is the beloved sequel to the first Home Alone. The first film was a huge success, pulling in nearly $500 million on a budget of just $18 million, so it was very successful. The sequel itself also did very well financially, bringing in nearly $400 million on a budget of just $28 million.
But that's just in terms of financial profits. How is the actual film from a critical standpoint?
Just like the first film, it was directed by Christopher Columbus, and the music was once again composed by John Williams, and of course most of the original cast returned. It aims to take the concept of the original and set it in a much bigger setting, New York City.
The land of opportunity.
This all sounds like the making of a great sequel, so what exactly is the plot? Well, it's not really all that different from the first one. Instead of being left behind like in the first film, Kevin gets on the wrong plane and lands in New York City. So off the bat, Kevin uses this opportunity to witness the wonders of all the city has to offer. However, it turns out that the Wet Bandits have escaped prison and have also conveniently landed in New York City. They plan to rob a very popular toy store, so Kevin once again has to use his wits and set up a series of traps for them to fall into.
And let me tell you, Kevin is cooking up some good traps because they are somehow even deadlier than they were before.
Even though I have my issues with Home Alone 2, it's still pretty solid if you ask me. If I'm being honest, up until doing my research and listening to other people discuss their thoughts on the film, I was under the impression that the film was pretty much loved by everyone.
And for the most part, I would actually say that that sentiment is true.
However, it's pretty hard to ignore that the film is more or less the same thing as the first film. Even Christopher Columbus himself has stated in an interview that it's essentially a remake of the original. With all that said, however, is this a bad thing? Not necessarily. A sequel is going to borrow elements from the previous entry in many ways. It's just the inevitable nature of making a new entry in the series. I've always said that the final product is really what matters at the end of the day, and even though the sequel borrows heavily from the first film, it's still done pretty well. I've always preferred the first film over the second one, but even I admit that Home Alone 2 has its advantages. For starters, I think the setting is a nice change of pace. Setting it in New York City makes the sequel much grander and ambitious in nature, but it also allows for a wider variety of locations and shenanigans for Kevin to get into. Not to mention, some of the shots in this film are breathtaking, especially the panning shot from above the Twin Towers. Marv and Harry are still funny as ever, and if there's one thing I can't complain about, it's seeing these two back in their respective roles. They still play these characters to a T, and sure, it could be argued that it's somewhat contrived that Kevin just happened to bump into them again, which is a fair assessment.
Like I said, I'm willing to let this slide if only because I enjoy these characters and their shenanigans.
You bust out of jail to rob 14 cents from a Santa Claus?
Every little bit helps. Besides, now we got our new nickname. We're the Sticky Bandits.
Real cute.
Just like the first film, the family takes a backseat. However, they still have their moments, especially with Kevin's older brother, Buzz.
Beat that, you little trout sniffer.
Another big highlight is the concierge, played by the legend himself, Tim Curry, who is mostly known for his role as Pennywise in the 1990 version of It. It should go without saying, but he's also really funny in the movie, especially when he's the butt of Kevin's pranks.
Get out of here, you nosy little pervert, or I'm gonna slap you silly!
Last but not least, we have to talk about the traps. One of the ways that they outdid the original was not only the amount, but the variety of traps seen here. Not only are they still really creative, but the setup for them is still really well done. I even like how they make callbacks to the original film with the paint buckets.
Don't you remember what happened last year?
No.
Well, considering that he probably suffered from a concussion in the last movie, I'm willing to give him a break.
But what I like is that it not only throws off the bandits, but the audience too. Take for instance the scene where Harry is turning on all the lights. The entire time you're expecting something to happen, but he turns on many lights without any repercussions. That is until he steps into the bathroom and turns on one final light. The fact that he took so long to react is equally hysterical. To further add to this notion, the traps are way more creative and deadly this time around. But again, this is also a family-friendly film. Or at least in theory it is.
I mean, shit, you think that Kevin McAllister is a young John Kramer with how sadistic these traps are.
Hello, Marv. I want to play a game.
I know that some people have criticized the Home Alone films for being too cruel and tasteless when it comes to its comedy, but the over-the-top tone makes it work for me. In many ways, it could be compared to a live-action cartoon. If you watched my review of Home Alone, I mentioned that Tom and Jerry is one of my favorite cartoons. But why is that? You wouldn't think that a cat and mouse constantly being in pain would be funny, but the creators actually made it work. The use of classic animation, music, sound design, and of course William Hanna's iconic scream made that original cartoon so damn good. Now, whether or not Home Alone 2 is as funny as Tom and Jerry, or even the first film for that matter, I'll leave that up to you. But I'd like to know your thoughts on the topic. Does the over-the-top nature work for you in Home Alone 2? Feel free to let me know what you think down below in the comments. With all that said, it's time for the verdict. So to answer the question, is Home Alone 2 a good sequel? Overall, I'd say yeah, it is. It's more ambitious, while trying to be bigger and better than its predecessor, and while it still maintains the charm, characters, and hilarious writing for the most part, I still prefer the original. That film was just more genuine to me, and will always hold a place in my heart. That said, every time I finish watching the first one, I immediately want to pop in Home Alone 2. It might be derivative in a lot of ways, but it still manages to be a good sequel in its own right.
And with that, this concludes my holiday marathon as a whole. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been an absolute blast doing this from start to finish. Let me know what your thoughts are of the whole series as a whole. Do you guys agree with my movie choices? What would you guys like to see next year? And what do you guys think about Home Alone 2 as a whole? I'd like to know what you have to say. But with all that said, guys, this has been That Guy Matt. I hope you guys all have a very safe and happy holidays and Merry Christmas wherever you celebrate it. And until next time, guys, I will see you guys all in my next review. Take care.